So you're gonna show where you stretch all those people? So you're gonna show us the dungeon?
I might try to show a move or two.
Yeah. I'll take some moves, sir.
Do you feel that?
Oh yes, sir. I don't feel my arms, sir. I can feel it.
Can you feel that, sir?
Oh yes, sir.
Red,
oh yeah,
rosy.
Yes, sir.
And by taking this arm back here,
no.
you just ease his hand in the position here. I got the power here to
stop it, sir. Stop.
You're listening to Hart Beat Radio.
Bob Johnson. We're coming to you live from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. The studios, Hart Beat Radio. Got a fabulous show for you great fans of Hart Beat Radio this afternoon. We have the family of one of the great legends of wrestling, Mr. Luther Lindsay. We'll be bringing on his wife, Gertrude, and his daughter, Luana. First of all, I'd like to introduce the co-host of the show from Portland Wrestling, Mr. Matt Merz. Welcome, Matt.
Well, thank you, Bob Johnson. It is such an honor to be back on Hart Beat Radio, and I am so excited to talk about Luther Lindsay, because when you talk about Luther Lindsay, you're talking about one of the few men who has made it into literally every Wrestling Hall of Fame there is. He's in the National Wrestling Alliance Hall of Fame. He is in the George Tragos Luthez Hall of Fame. He is in the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame down in Wichita Falls, Texas. And he's also in the WWE Hall of Fame. He's in the Stampede Wrestling Hall of Fame. And he was the first man to ever hold the NWA Pacific Northwest heavyweight title for Don Owens' Portland Wrestling promotion. And so to learn more about who he was as a man is going to be very fascinating, because he is long overdue for recognition.
I'd like to also introduce our host of the show, trainer, wrestler, promoter extraordinaire from Calgary, Alberta, the one and only Mr. Bruce Hart. Welcome back to Hart Beat Radio, Bruce. Got a great show this
Thanks very
evening.
much, Bob. I'm thrilled to be talking to my dear old friends Gertrude and Luana, and as most people know, Luther was one of my father's all-time favorites, almost to the point where my dad considered him like a brother. And the stories are some of the most famous stories in wrestling, where my dad had this picture in his wallet of Luther Lindsay, and he would show it to anyone at the drop of a hat. And he was always extolling all Luther's virtues. And it was funny, that was the only picture my dad ever did have in his wallet, was of Luther, so it kind of indicated how high he held him in regard. But he was always such a gentle and really nice guy, and I remember we all kind of idolized Luther, and one of the nicest guys I ever met in the wrestling business, but also one of the best wrestlers we ever had up here. That's why I said it's a real thrill to be able to hook up again with Gertrude and Luana, because Gertrude was up there with Luther on Sundays and all with my mother, and I don't know how many kids we had about that time, maybe about 10 or something like that. And Luana was up there all the time, and so it's sort of like a reunion now to be able to talk to Gertrude and Luana and talk about a guy that we all loved and admired so much. So.
I've got another special guest that's going to be joining us for a little while. Your brother, the one and only Ross Hart.
It's great being with you again, even if it's over the airwaves. But it was wonderful seeing Luther get his induction in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, and well deserved and long overdue. But he's always in our hearts and memories.
Ross's middle name, I might add, is Lindsay. So.
I was named after the legendary Luther. I sure was. When I had seen Luther wrestling, I think in '67, he had some really good matches with Stan Stasiak and I think Shag Thomas. And Shag actually wrestled against Luther here, but I think they were actually a pretty popular tag team in Portland for Don Owen. I'm sure you recall a lot of his great matches and rivalries in the late 50s, and I'm not sure when he was up for us, at 63, 64 maybe, and then his last run was about 67, and I also remember the very unique mixed tag team matches with Jersey Joe Walcott and Luther against Stan Stasiak and Shag Thomas, which
I remember Luther.
I think over 7,000 fans in the corral. It was a pretty extraordinary match.
Oh yeah.
One of the things I liked about Luther the best was he had no artificial additives. Like he just go out there and wrestle, and he was like one of the most respected workers we ever had. But a lot of the other blacks back in those days were all playing stereotypical roles and all that stuff. But Luther just wrestled. He didn't have some bogus name like the Boogeyman or the
Black Sabbath or something.
Yeah, all that. And I remember a few times I'd be in the car and I listened to my dad and Lou Thez and Don Leo Jonathan and some of those guys talking, and they were all almost reverential how much respect and regard they had for Luther, and I just hear them talking as a little kid, and they'd be talking not only about what a great worker he was, but what a great person and a great guy to have in the territory. And he's one of the few wrestlers I've never heard anything bad said about. He was always just beloved by almost anyone and everyone. They spoke very reverentially of him.
And, Bruce, we were talking about, and Ross, we were talking about the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in Wichita Falls, Texas. I have Johnny Mantell joining us, too.
Oh, geez.
Johnny, welcome to Hart Beat Radio.
Bruce, I heard them same stories, but I heard it from Leo Garibaldi and Don Leo Jonathan and Buck Robley and my brother Ken about the prowess of Luther Lindsay and his ability in the ring and the gentlemanship that he had outside the ring. And again, it was one of those, to me, one of the greatest classes, probably the other greatest class in my mind that was inducted in one of our categories together was, of course, the class when your father Stu and Leroy McGurk were voted into the Hall of Fame in the same Pioneer class. This class this year for the television era of Luther Lindsay and Sputnik Monroe and the fights that they fought back in the 50s and what they did inside the ring is just really a great sign to me that the Hall of Fame is doing the right thing and getting the right people into the Hall of Fame, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, I'm really delighted, and I think a lot of people today maybe forget the climate in the 1950s when Luther was, he was like a trailblazer, but he was like a Jackie Robinson of pro wrestling, because people take it for granted now, but back in those days, there was all kinds of segregation, and a lot of the black wrestlers couldn't wrestle in all kinds of places in the United States, and I think that was one reason why my dad had a lot of guys like Luther and Bearcat and Sweet Daddy Siki and people like that up here, because they said it was a different world back then, and especially if you're heel. Luther fortunately was a baby face, but a lot of roadblocks and a lot of unrest and all that kind of stuff. You're talking about the era of Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and the Freedom Marches and stuff like that. So Luther was a trailblazer, and my dad always admired him tremendously just because he did it in such a dignified and respectful manner, where he engendered respect with the fans and his fellow wrestlers too. They respected and admired him for doing it the way he did it too, and he was really like a equivalent of a Jackie Robinson to pro wrestling. And I think a lot of people don't know that, but I know that was one of the things that set him apart as well, that he did it with such dignity and class.
Well, and I think too, that like you said, that climate at that time was so fragile and so if, and, but kind of an era, and these guys stuck to their guns and stuck to what they did and believed in what they did. And even though they may have done something that and they may not have realized what they were accomplishing and getting done, they stayed the course and got the job done. And again, I couldn't be prouder of the Hall of Fame and what it's doing, and I sure couldn't be prouder of the fact that Luther's family was in. And I know I sure didn't get enough time to visit with them, but they had a great time while they were in the state of Texas, and we're honored to be a part of what we were doing. And we were as much, if not more, honored to have them come in and represent Luther Lindsay at the induction. And that's what, to me, is so much fun. And I know Ross's middle name he was named after Luther, and
sure is.
And it was a lot of fun to see that interaction between the family and Ross and the family with the Sputnik Monroe family, and it was just really a special time. And I say it all the time, and I don't say it just because I'm here and Kay's here 6 days a week doing it, but if you have anything to do with the professional wrestling business, whether you're a fan or a wrestler or a longtime family member of it, and you haven't made the trek to Wichita Falls, Texas, to see the PWHF in all its glory, you're missing out. You really are. And I know hearing Ross and Bob and everybody talk, there is something about Texas hospitality and something about the way when you get to Texas, we try to treat you. And I know Bob and Ross had to leave a little early this year and didn't get to stay to the Red Bastille Texas Shootout on Sunday, but we had over 300 wrestlers at the shootout on Sunday with an open mic, and Killer Tim Brooks and myself and Mansfield and Tiger all going up and telling stories, Susan Green telling stories, and it was just a fun day to be a wrestler and to be alive and be able to tell stories and laugh and have a good time. And that's what the shootout's for on Sunday, and it was a perfect mix of the stressful week of the induction and everything that took place to be able to have that day on Sunday. And so we're really proud of what's being put together here and what's being done, and it's just getting bigger and better every day, and that's what's so much fun about it.
Everybody was most gracious. We enjoyed meeting everyone and interacting, and we're sorry, too, that we didn't have the amount of time to spend in the Hall of Fame, as we would have liked to. It's so fascinating, and, so much to see. You really need a whole week.
Yeah, I sure do, and Johnny's expanding it all the time. He's got all sorts of memorabilia and pictures, and I think we've got a few nice editions of Luther now that we're adding to the Hall of Fame, and that's great as well. And Luther just had a tremendous build, and that was in a day where everyone was very natural, and he was just such a gifted athlete. He had a fantastic physique. He was very fast in the ring. I remember he used to throw just incredible drop kicks, and he was just a great worker. He really was, and he certainly overcame the color barrier that existed at that time, and everybody just spoke well of him, whether they were white or black or any denomination, and one of the best workers of his time, and sadly passed before his time, but always will be remembered. And for us, it's he's like a father figure, because he spent so much time with my dad here, and he was so great with all of our kids, all of our family, and sentimentally it was wonderful spending time with you, Luana, and Gertrude for some of those Sunday dinners, and then you played with some of us. I think you spent some time getting into trouble with Allison and Brett and I, anyway, it was just a lot of fun, and then watching Luther wrestle on Fridays and then on TV the next day, but just some incredible memories. What were some of the classic matches that you saw him have? I don't know if you remember from the 60s, in Calgary or in Portland, where he spent a lot of time, and of course in the Carolinas, but what were some of the best matches he had, or even tag team matches, as I know he great in singles and tags. But do you remember anyone offhand?
I remember more, I think, as of starting to see it here at home.
Yeah.
I'll say maybe, although, I do remember things as of age 5 as far as the wrestling in itself. Usually seeing, I think, maybe 6, 7, and going, traveling where we go wrestling North Carolina in areas, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. And, seeing it, I was always right up at the ring. Mama, she didn't have to worry about me. Everybody knew me everywhere, and inside they would all watch out for me, and I just liked being right up there, right where the action was, and you probably would have thought I was twice my age when I was watching it. I just was all into it. I just thoroughly enjoyed it.
That's pretty amazing at your young age, because sometimes you'd see a lot of upsetting things. If Luther was selling or being double teamed or something, or if he even was cut open or anything like that. It's probably pretty hard to watch and see and worry about him. But I certainly remember you had a good program here with Shag Thomas. They actually worked against each other. Shag was a heel and tagging with Stan Stasiak, and they did the mixed tags. I think they did at least 2 with Jersey Joe and Luther, and those were incredible matches, like mixed tag team matches. And then Luther and Shag actually went on to tag team, I think, against the Von Steigers in Portland and Seattle, and they had a great run as a tag team. So, but it seemed Luther and Shag, made money together. They really loved each other. They could work against each other as opponents. They could be a tag team. And back then there was very little information exchange between territories, a little bit about the wrestling magazine. So fans in Portland had no idea that they were arch rivals here, and then they were tag teaming there a few months after, but business was kind of protected better then. But I certainly remember some of those classic matches that Luther had, and some really good singles.
I remember, Ross,
with
when Jersey Joe Walcott was with Luther. Jersey Joe had this other black track star who had been an Olympic idol named Jesse Owens, and he was down at the matches that night too, and he was with Luther and Jersey Joe Walcott. And
did he second them, or was he in their corner?
Yeah, he was. I think he was in town for a sportsman's dinner or something, and he was a good friend of Jersey Joe and Luther's, and he was down at the show. And I was in school then, and my dad, Stu, brought I think Luther and Jersey Joe Walcott and Jesse Owens to the school, and they had a big assembly. It was like a big huge story, and all the kids all went to the assembly in the auditorium, and there's like about 1,000 people in there. I remember Jesse and Jersey Joe were saying how much respect and regard they had for Luther. And my dad was quite proud of the whole thing, And
did Jersey Joe keep in touch with Luther over the years, Luana? I wasn't sure if I'm sure they must have. I know they wrestled here together. I think Jersey Joe was up for a couple of weeks, and this was after he'd retired from boxing, but not too many years after that. But did they keep in touch after that?
Not that I know. I do remember meeting. I can remember meeting him when I was younger.
Yeah.
He was from New Jersey, I thought. Jersey
in New Jersey? Wasn't it New Jersey, Mama, when I met him? Or?
I thought it was in Calgary.
Calgary, okay, when I met him.
When he gave you those wind jackets?
I know, okay.
Yeah,
I know he used to send me, and he'd send others. He used to send me blue, for about 3 years or so, blue windbreakers, a different shade of blue windbreaker. Yeah, $10 and a blue windbreaker. And I remember that very vividly.
Luana, I have somebody on the air, just phoned in here. Tell us who you are and welcome to Hart Beat Radio.
I'm the intelligent, sensational destroyer.
Hey, Dick.
Great to hear from you, Dick.
Great speaking with you.
Had some incredible matches with Luther back in the day, I'm told, and you guys were running together in Japan, and maybe tell us a little bit about your background with Luther.
Well, I tell you what, my background with Luther was a fight from bell to bell. He was a real tough wrestler. When I wrestled him up in Seattle or Portland, it was a battle. Luther was a great athlete. He was a good football player. He was a good wrestler. I can't say enough about how good Luther was in the ring and how he conducted himself as an individual.
I hear that from everybody. They all speak similarly. What a great wrestler he was, and what a even better person he was. So,
Dick, how many territories did you wrestle with Luther? Obviously, Seattle and Portland. Were you with him at all in Texas or the Carolinas? Or I know he toured Japan, I think in 1968, I believe, but did you
I had Luther in several places that you mentioned, in Texas, and primarily in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington area. That was the primary area, but I also wrestled him in Japan when he came over there. I just can't say enough, and I'm very sorry to see that he passed away some time ago. He was also a friend in the business. We were in the business to make money. We were in the business to make money for each other. We were friends. You got Bruce and Ross. They're friends of mine too. But if they're against me in the ring, and it'll be a different story.
Yeah. I know he apparently worked a lot with Kiniski and King Curtis and Fez and some of those guys. It seemed like a lot of them, including Luther, were great football players and transcended into the wrestling.
And he was just as great a football player as he was a wrestler.
Luther worked in a lot of different territories, so Gertrude, you must have a lot of memories of crossing into different states and probably not staying in one place for too long, I think Luther liked to travel, and even though there were a lot of restrictions against the Afro-American wrestlers at that time, I think his work was so good and he was so respected and liked, by promoters that he never had trouble getting work. He always worked on top. He was main eventer, and I think did very well. Even though his career was cut far too short. But Gertrude, you must have a lot of memories of different states, and of course wrestling up here in cold Calgary in our terrible winter sometimes. But it was great that Luther took his talents to so many territories. And he didn't just stay in one spot.
Well, let's kind of go through Luther's life history here. I know he was born December 30th, 1924, outside of Norfolk, Virginia. Yeah. And what was his childhood like?
He was that much older than me.
Now, what was his childhood like? Who were his mother and father? Did he have brothers and sisters? Obviously, we know he had a brother. Did he have a lot of siblings?
Oh, yes. He had two brothers and a sister under him. And his mother, she's from Norfolk. And his father passed when Luther was about 5 years old. And so his stepfather raised him.
How did he come to take the name Lindsay, Gertrude? That was your name, right? No.
Yes, when we were in Al Half's office, he said, Goodall, that's not too easy. So he looked at me and he said, well, tell me, what was your maiden name? And I said, Lindsay. And he said, that's it. That's going to be your name. Luther Lindsay.
I like it.
Just like you see on TV.
Now, he played football in college for both Norfolk State and the Hampton Institute, correct?
Yes. And he
was also the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association wrestling champion, too, I believe.
Well, I know he was the wrestling champion in college, and I know he had all the awards that you could get at that time in football. If he'd have come along now, he'd have been up there with, I'll say, Emmitt Smith.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think he was an All-American tackle guard.
Most people forget that back in the 40s, NFL was not, it was kind of like Jackie Robinson. And I was told that Luther was kind of like the trailblazer for pro wrestling and for football, too. Like, most people forget that now, that the NFL was not integrated till around the same time as Jackie Robinson, too. So it was probably a lot tougher to make any career. And they weren't making that much money then either, so
no,
a lot different world at that time.
It was difficult. We slept in the car many a night, going from territory to territory.
What year did you two get together, Gertrude?
Well, actually, in 1949, we met, and
you
we got
hooked him.
married. Oh, well.
You hooked him in 1949, huh?
I guess we hooked each other.
Was he in the business at that time, Gertrude, or what year?
No,
did
we met in college. We met at Hampton Institute.
And did you go with him up to Canada when he went to play in Hamilton and in Victoria?
No, I wasn't with him up there.
Gertrude, how many times were you up in Calgary with him, though? I think just about every time.
Yes, every time he... Well, I traveled mostly with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never been so cold in my life.
Yeah. I can believe it. I remember it was
below zero.
Yeah. It was definitely cold. Like that. I remember the last time you were up here was in the winter of '67, but and it was great having you. No matter what. So when Luther started, I know he did a lot of the amateur wrestling with my dad and a lot of the submission wrestling. But where did he actually start? Was that in Ohio where he broke in, or in which state did he actually first break into the business?
It was in Ohio, up in Columbus.
In Columbus, eh?
Yeah.
I remember some of those old shooters, Gertrude. I ran into them different times, like Ruffy Silverstein, and I think they worked for a promoter named Al Haft.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
They all.
You remember that
very
old
well
shooter that started in Al Haft's territory, Dick Beyer?
Who?
Were you around at that time, Dick? And
yes, I was.
That was kind of a bit of a mistake.
I was sent by Ed Don George, was the promoter in Buffalo, New York, and he sent me to Columbus, Ohio, and to Al Haft, and I was.
There was a few old shooters in there.
The office was on the second floor, 261 South High Street. I can still remember where it was,
good.
And the ring was on the third floor. And another shooter that was there at the time was Joe Scarpa, Bill Miller, and
Fluffy
Penny
Silverstein.
Banner.
I remember them. Yeah.
You remember Penny Banner?
Yes, Ann Miller. I remember them.
I got some wrestling pointers from Penny Banner. She was in the ring with us when we were training back in 1954, 55, 56, 57, something like that. It's nice talking to you. I'm going to leave you and let you talk to Gertrude there.
Okay, Dick, but it's been great seeing you at Cauliflower Alley and Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. You're one of the great ambassadors, and you've done so much for the industry, and it was fantastic you having you on the show and sharing your memories with Luther, and it was just a real bonus to have you on the show, and I look forward to seeing you at the next event, maybe in Waterloo or definitely in Las Vegas or Wichita Falls next year, Dick.
Nice talking to you, and thank you very much for calling me today.
Now, around 1953 is when Luther first came to the Pacific Northwest, and one of his early tag partners was a gentleman by the name of George Doucette. Do you have any memories of that, Gertrude?
Oh, please, no. His name really isn't. It's not in my memory. That's all I can say.
George Doucette.
Okay, let me throw another of those names from back in the old Portland days. What about Pepper Martin?
Oh, Pepper Martin. I remember that name.
Do you?
You know.
Hey, the matches that really outstand in my memory is the match and the rematches he had with Lou Thez when Thez was the champion. Now, those were some matches to see.
I was told, Gertrude, that Luther was the first black to fight for the NWA World Title against Lou Thez in 1953. Is that right? Or?
He was the first to wrestle Lou Thez, but he was not the first African American to compete for that belt. It was old Celie Samara. Reg Samara was the first African American to ever wrestle for the NWA World Title. Luther, it looks like, was second.
Okay.
Yeah,
in
very
the
close.
Lou Thez era.
And then definitely the first to challenge Thez.
I remember when Lou Thez was up wrestling for us in 1981, and my dad and Lou Thez were in the car riding back from Edmonton, and they spent the whole trip telling Luther Lindsay stories, and it's just kind of incredible how much admiration and respect they had for Luther, and they had all these stories about Luther, and it's something to behold.
I know our dad had some pretty grueling sessions with Luther and George Gordienko down in the dungeon in the basement there. I don't know if the kids were even allowed to watch them going at it, but Luther and George were...
I always remember, I was pretty young then, but I remember my dad and Luther and this George Gordienko, who was another legendary shooter type, and quite often they would get these young guys that were trying to get into the business, like Archie the Stomper Goldie, and they would, most times, my dad or Luther or Gordienko would take these guys, put what they called through the mill, and you hear these grown men screaming, and quite often they were
hard.
Yeah, and I was kind of like a little kid then. I was kind of almost have nightmares because you hear these grown men screaming, and a lot of them are like big football player types, and it was kind of like my dad used to say it was like the three-headed dog at the gates of hell. It's him and Luther and George Gordienko putting these guys through whatever. I remember we were kind of little kids watching this, and it was wide-eyed and hearing this screaming, and occasionally my mother would stick her head down the dungeon was down in the basement, and my mother would shout, leave them alone, or something like that, you know. I recall one time the noise was maybe too loud for my mother, and she threw like a big bowl down the stairs, and it broke and shattered. And I think my dad said, "I think Helen's calling me." But
I know the walls, you know, of the dungeon. They had all the marks where Luther had tackled guys who he would do a double leg dive and then tackle these guys right through the wall, and those were all the.
And there was holes in the ceiling too.
Holes in the ceiling and in the walls from Luther.
Somebody's head went through the ceiling, and there was a few blood stains that Stu left them on the wall. Thought they had a bit of character.
Oh yeah.
But Luther was very much feared. You know, he was respected, but he was feared, and I don't think anybody took liberties with him or George Gordienko. You know, they were you know, very very tough guys. They were big. They were strong. They were, you know, they lifted weights. You know, Luther was very strong. I think he had a bench press of over 450, I think, but you know, and they just in incredible shape, and they could wrestle for hours and hours, and just had so much stamina. You know, they and if you wrestled against them, you knew you're going to go through a very painful initiation. You know, it would be, you know, it was going to be hard as hell, you know, and a lot of them never came back. You know, it was the way that you separated the men from the boys, and if you couldn't survive working out with George or Luther, you know, you didn't break in. You know, Stu set a very high standard for guys to get into the industry, and you know, a lot of them went through hell. You know, as soon as Luther went through them, and then George would, and then Stu would guzzle them after that. So they would get it from three extremes. You know, it was but anyway. But I was a little before my time because I was born in 1960. But I certainly heard and I saw the marks and the stains and you know, the shattered walls, you know, of where Luther did a lot of damage down there.
I remember Ross. I toured England in the 1970s, and I was amazed that all the British wrestlers feared Luther as well. They told me he had been over there with, I think, George Gordienko in the 60s, and they said it was like kind of a wolf running roughshod in the hen house or something. That he had. There was this legendary gym over there called the Wigan Gym, where all these guys like Billy Robinson had come, and I heard Luther had, you know, kind of run roughshod over all the British wrestlers, and they're all, but they were almost in awe.
What was Luther like as a man in his private life?
He was I'll say no frills and put on. He was nice, very nice. He was just a plain, simple guy.
Was he religious at all, Gertrude? Like, did he ever take you to church, or, you know, I wasn't sure, you know, or if he was the gospel or not.
His stepfather was a preacher in Norfolk, Virginia, and whenever we went to the Virginia territory to wrestle, we would spend like that night so we could go to his mother and stepfather's church on that Sunday. Everybody that really met him, they liked him. Yes.
Did he ever talk about what it was like to go from, because I'm here in Portland, Oregon, and so I grew up hearing about Luther Lindsay. And here in the 1950s and 60s, he was, you know, holding tag team titles with a white man named Pepper Martin, and down in the South, he was still being billed as a Negro champion at the same time. Did he ever talk about what that was like? That had to have just been such a bizarre switch of I mean, to go from one world to the other, just completely different for him.
It was very frustrating, yes. And that's why we didn't try to stay in this territory. too long.
Mhm.
It was better, much, much better away. That's why we spent most of his wrestling out in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, and Calgary, Canada.
And when he was being billed as a Negro champion, was he cheered by white people in the South, or was he booed? How did that all work?
Yes, because here on Saturdays, they would Jim Crockett would have TV wrestling, and the white people here that were wrestling fans, they came to like him very much, yes. But then there were some that didn't. It was difficult. I'll tell you, it was very difficult. And it was just most frustrating for him to be down in this area.
Yeah, especially in the South, which where the segregation and discrimination, lasted, well into the late '60s, maybe even later, in places like Georgia, Tennessee, and Mississippi. So even for someone like Luther, it had to be difficult to experience himself or see a lot of the other Afro-American wrestlers kind of held back, because of that. But he certainly helped pave the way for a lot of the black wrestlers, and a lot of them went on to become pretty successful in the Carolinas. But I think a lot of them owed a lot to Luther, who was a great performer in the ring, but he also had just a great relationship with promoters and wrestlers, and nobody ever spoke negatively of him. He was a gentleman and a great athlete, and very well respected. One last question I have, Gertrude, and I unfortunately have to head off, but is what were some of the favorite promoters Luther enjoyed wrestling for in his career?
Stu Hart, of course.
Uh-huh.
And Don Owens in Portland. Those were the two that he really, really liked.
Yeah, and Luther was such a favorite in both areas, and I think he was a regular on the Crockett Promotions there, and unfortunately that's sadly where he passed away in January of 1972. But when he passed, I know that it had to be very shocking and devastating for you, because he was only 46, and I think because it happened right in the ring. It was just after he had finished winning his match, I think, over Bobby Paul, and it was very shocking that it happened, but upsetting to a lot of the wrestlers because they loved Luther. He was a star on the shows, and very much missed after that. But it certainly opened the doors for a lot of successful wrestlers after that. There was Bobo Brazil and Rufus Jones, and Keith Daddy Siki, and so many, not just in the Carolinas, but all over the states. But certainly Luther was one of the early ones. I think of him and Celie Samara and Bearcat
Ricky
Wright,
Waldo.
Some of them, but Ricky Waldo, Shag Thomas, of course.
I remember Ross when my dad had Muhammad Ali up here, and would have been around March of 1972. It was shortly after Luther had passed, and Muhammad Ali told my dad that Luther was one of his role models or his idols when he was kind of growing up. He aspired to be like Luther Lindsay. Growing up
did Luther ever wrestle in Kentucky, Gertrude?
No, I didn't
go
with him.
I know, and that's where Ali was from. But
said he had been kind of bouncing around himself, kind of. He's from Louisville, Ali, or Cassius Clay as he was, but it was nice to hear that, though.
I wanted to ask a little bit about the car accident Luther was in, because I know that really kind of changed his career. That accident took quite a bit out of him. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened there?
Well, as I remember it, he had gone to some little town outside of Portland. And coming back, something caused him to run off the road, and he hit the telegraph pole and bounced off of that into an oak tree. And he had his hand up in the window, like you rest your hand against the little side blade that they had in cars back then.
Yeah.
And that glass just almost cut his thumb off.
Ooh.
They had to stitch all the way around down to his wrist.
Mm.
And after that, his arm began to kind of wither down some.
Atrophy, yeah.
That affected him a lot too. It did, and the windshield broke out, and it gouged out of space in his forehead down to the bone.
Ooh. Is that also where he got that scar that's kind of on his chest there?
No, he didn't get that. We had like a chicken shed. He had a piece of tin up on the top of some supplies in the shed that we, fed the chickens out of and everything.
Yeah.
And for some reason, that tin slid off the shelf. He was moving something, and the tin slid off. And, of course, he didn't have a shirt on or anything. And it just came right down and
wow,
sliced him right across the chest.
Did Luther work much in North Carolina, or was there any? I heard there was because of all the segregation and stuff, a lot of those places, he didn't wrestle like in Carolina and Alabama and some of the southern states.
Whenever he wrestled here in the Carolinas and Virginia, it had to be with another black wrestler before integration came along.
Yeah,
it
a
had
lot
to
of
be
our
another.
modern day fans can't even fathom that, It's kind of
Yes, but that's the way it was.
I really can't. I cannot. It's I'm only 36, and I just cannot wrap my brain around that idea. In any way, I can't figure out how the heck are people so backwards?
Oh,
man.
Yes.
How bizarre.
It is. It really is. The whole idea of segregation was ridiculous.
I guess you hear about it now, and it was right concurrent with that whole era with Rosa Parks and the Freedom Marches and the Mississippi burnings and the James Meredith and even Muhammad Ali came a bit later, but it was pretty pervasive back then. People forget, that there was all those restrictions, and I know my dad told me he wrestled in the 40s and early 50s a bit down in some of those places, and he used to describe that blacks weren't allowed to stay in certain hotels or fans weren't allowed to. There's all kinds of stuff that seems almost unimaginable today. that was kind of the just the way it was back then, And
yes. Oh, yes. I was back in those days, yes.
Well, I think that's one more reason why Luther's held in such high respect, by the people like my dad and the Luthezes and another guy that spoke really highly of Luther. We had him on our show a while back, was Don Leo Jonathan, and they all said Luther had incredible courage, that he did it with such dignity and did it in a very respectful way, but he still made his point, and he, did it by just showing a good example, and I think that was another thing that engendered so much respect.
What was he like as a father?
I was his son and daughter. I've always said. And before I could, because he excelled in his sport, as a black man, it got me started in swimming. And actually, both of my parents, both he and Mom were excellent swimmers, and they taught me at a very young age how to swim. I believe in Honolulu.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. When they taught me when I was 3,
no,
4, 5.
You were
5 years old. And I started competing back in the States here at 6 years old. And I had to do my best. Even in practice, I had to excel in practice as if I were in competition. And he stayed on me with that, and he stayed on me. He was pretty strict, but just disciplined. But I started competing at age 6, and I actually swam when we lived in Canada on the Canadian team up there. And, that treacherous cold, Mom and I would have a lot of times getting up the little hill back where we lived because of the ice, and I'd be like, oh, my gosh, after I've been swimming 2.5 hours, I couldn't wait to get in bed. But I did. I swam on the Canadian team, and I swam on the team when we lived in Oregon. The last time when I was 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I swam on the team in Oregon. And, of course, I swam here at home, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. And remember the last time we left Oregon, which we've been home ever since, was when I turned 10. I believe we left on my 10th birthday, either that same day or the day after. I've been home ever since. And, of course, Dad passed away about a year and a half after that. In February 21st, 1972. I was 11 and a half, and so we had only been back home for about a year and a half before he passed away this last time.
Now, how do y'all feel about him finally getting the credit he deserves? It seems just here in the last year or two, he's really started to get a lot of recognition for his contributions to the wrestling business.
Oh, we feel elated, and and of course, along with it can't be said enough that of course it's long overdue. The answer to a lot of that, which it's been being discussed, but we're elated. We are elated.
Yes.
And I've learned a lot of the things. I've been listening that have been said tonight. Of course, I knew some stuff from Mama, but of course a lot, I could not remember being so young. But a lot of the things I've read in the history, looking, my father up and everything, and a lot of the matches and, the areas that he wrestled and some of the, things that you all have discussed here on the show tonight, I actually had read about.
I'd like to step in and say that Teddy Gordonico brought some very personal pictures of George and Luther together, fishing and spending time in different places, and I never even got a chance to show the family those pictures, and I'm going to make copies and get them to them, but they'll also have a great spot in the Hall of Fame as soon as we get that area fixed for him, and
that's fantastic.
very personal pictures where, again, like they're out fishing and they've caught a string of fish, and you see these two athletes standing there. You see them standing there, and you think, oh my gosh, and then you hear these stories, and I've been in awe tonight hearing the stories about the dungeon and all the people, and you hear those stories, and then you have these pictures to show these athletes and understand the story that much more. It's really remarkable, and it is, as I always say, it is history, and that is the history that the Hall of Fame is trying to preserve for the business, and just very excited again from our end that the Luther Lindsay family was so gracious and came to Wichita Falls and enjoyed the evening with us, and I hope they got their fill of ribs.
Oh, yes, yes.
We had a wonderful time. For the short time that we were there, we had a wonderful time. And, hopefully we can get back out there once you get, like you said, some other things in place.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll need to get back out there and see that, and actually be able to take the time to see it all. And I heard your son visited with a couple of the guys here locally about coming back and wrestling a little bit. So we're excited about that opportunity, and yes, we cannot wait to have you back in Wichita Falls.
Oh, thank you.
It was really a nice tribute.
Yes.
You all have done an excellent job there.
Anytime your son wants to come to Wichita Falls, I got a room for him at my house, and I'll make sure he's okay.
Does he have any interest in following in his grandfather's footsteps?
He hadn't really said. He enjoyed he actually did wrestle in high school, junior high,
and football.
Yeah, but he ended up playing football for the rest of his years. So he wrestled, I believe it was 2 years in junior high.
Really?
And he enjoyed being out there at the, Hall of Fame, but he hasn't talked about pursuing anything. Like I said, he played football for the remainder of his junior high and high school years, and he just completed his freshman year in college. He's a construction management major.
Oh wow, good for him.
Yeah, he goes to college down at Greenville, North Carolina.
Feel free to send him up here anytime, Luana. We still train. I still train quite a few for WWE, like my niece Natalia.
I know.
And
I
some
keep
of them.
up with you.
But if he ever wants to come up, I know my own kids train a lot. They're around the same age, about early 20s. So we'd love to see him. It would be kind of a full circle or a dream come true
if he ever does.
What's his name?
His name is Jacob. Yeah, he has my father's middle name. Yeah, that was Daddy's middle name.
That would be.
And my daughter's name is Lindsay.
Well, my other sister named her daughter Lindsay after Luther as well, so that was kind of the beat goes on, as they say. But yeah, if Jacob's ever, we'd love to. I've got the ring, the very ring that Luther used to wrestle in Calgary. In my, I'm looking at it as I talk. It's set up in the yard here. So, a standing invitation if Jacob ever wants to. I'll probably get my brother Brett out here. He'd be honored to be in the ring with the Lindsay as well.
So if he ever talks about it or takes a serious decision on it, whatever, then of course we'll send him your way.
We'll be honored. Share some dungeon stories with him.
Yeah, he'd get a kick out of that. He was getting a kick out of some of the stories that, Ross and Eddie Gordienko were telling when we were there. It was like, what?
Well, I would love to have been there. I've got a zillion Luther and Gordienko and Stu stories myself. So the message
sounds like Stu.
remember my dad telling me a few times how Luther leg dived him, and he said he was so fast. My dad said he knew it was coming, but he still couldn't do anything about it. So. Anyway, Bob, I'd like to just thank everybody, and thank you, Bob, for arranging this. It was a great honor, and I know my dad and Mom would have been delighted to know that Luana and Gertrude, were on the show. They'd be beaming with pride, So.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, ladies, for joining us here today.
And thank
this
you
has
as
been
well.
a real dream come true for me. I grew up here in the Portland area, listening to my father and his brother, my uncle, talk about men like Luther Lindsay and Shag Thomas, and it wasn't until I was 30 years old and the Internet came into existence that I found that I learned that they were both black. And I think that really that is why you're going to see men like Luther Lindsay and Shag Thomas start to get the respect that is long overdue, is because of the Internet and the ability for fans and historians to get together now and compare their records and say, well, wait a second, look at this guy's legacy. And, you begin to hear these stories from men like Stu Hart, and then his children have stories, and so on and so forth. And I think it's just wonderful to see the first Portland Wrestling NWA Pacific Northwest Heavyweight Champion, Luther Lindsay, finally get the respect he deserves, and to see him in every major wrestling Hall of Fame there is just wonderful. And thank you so much for being with us today.
And thank you so much
very much
for having us.
Yes, thank you for all that you've said, and it's truly heartwarming, and I mean, we're so grateful.
Yes.
Send Jacob up here if he ever has any aspirations.
How big a boy is he? When's the last time he had his ass whipped?